Welcome, everyone. If you're seeing us, it means that you have joined Webit Global Impact Forum. This is a panel discussion which is dedicated to the most buzzy, I would say, topic in the public discourse. We're going to talk about the new era of internet, Web3, technology next frontier. Before we jump into that discussion, I'd like our guests to say a few words about themselves, and after a short introduction, to highlight what are your personal interests in Web3. Let's start with you, Radhika.
Sure. Hi, nice to be with everybody today. I'm Radhika Iyengar. I'm founding partner at StarChain Ventures. We're a venture studio here in Silicon Valley. And I'll just say by way of introduction that I published my book on blockchain. It's called Enterprise Blockchain Has Arrived in 2019. And first line of our preface was that Web 3.0 was going to be the big thing. So I think we were one of the first few people to call out Web 3 well before people even realized what Web 3 was or was widely talked about. And my personal involvement in this space has been truly transformative as well, because I think the technology itself is that transformative. And I've been in this space for about 5+ years and fully an evangelist, an advocate, a believer of the power of Web3 to create this open, decentralized world that is really going to change everything that we do and is already changing everything that we do. And I guess my personal, passion right now is I'm working on 2 NFT collections, and they are really largely focused on underrepresented communities. So I think the whole concept of diversity and equity and inclusion and equal access for all is something that really propels me forward to be actively involved in this space. Thank you.
That is really amazing and encouraging. Thank you so much for what you are doing. Tom, let's talk about you.
Great, thank you. Good to be here again. Appreciate the invitation. My name is Tom Trowbridge. I helped, a couple things, but I helped found Hedera Hashgraph, which is, to Radhika's point, kind of, I think, the leading enterprise distributed ledger in existence. Is governed by enterprises, Google, IBM, Nomura, DLA Piper, among many others, and it's designed to be a distributed ledger for enterprises, governed by enterprises. But I left there back in 2019, right about when you published your book, I guess, and joined as a co-founder of Fluence Labs. Fluence Labs is backed by a lot of leading Web3 investors, including Multicoin, 1KX, Distributed Global, Protocol Labs, and Arweave, and others. And we are building a peer-to-peer sort of decentralized compute network. And so if you think of the peer-to-peer world, you have payments, and you have, which is Bitcoin, Ethereum, everything else, and you have storage, which is Arweave and Filecoin, IPFS. And the missing piece for a fully decentralized world is having compute exist pretty much outside of the cloud. And that dovetails into my interest, which is, as industries generally have grown larger over time, across sort of centuries, inevitably they become closer and closer to governments. And we're at a stage now where the Web 2 companies have become so large that they are becoming effective arms of governments. And whether you're talking about Amazon, Google, Facebook, whatever, they're really becoming central points of censorship and central points of control for governments, especially outside of the US. And that's something I think is kind of dangerous. And the other point we have is the cloud is becoming so big. 60 or 70% of the cloud is only 3 companies, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. And that is leading to incredible centralization risks in terms of failures, and also in terms of stifling innovation, given the huge difficulties in leaving those platforms. And so solving both of those problems is what is driving my interest in building a fully peer-to-peer world, which I think is what Web3 is about.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom, definitely. And as we all saw George Lucas movies, we all know that with the rise of centralization, the Republic tends to become empires, and we don't want to have that one. Thank you. So Sandy, it's your turn for introduction.
Thank you, Max. And thanks so much for Webit for having me on today. My name is Sandy Carter, and I am SVP for Unstoppable Domains. Unstoppable Domains is a startup. In fact, we were just named, let me go this way. We were just named by Forbes as one of the top startups for 2022. What we focus in on is digital identity. So ensuring that you have identity that travels with you throughout the Web3 and the metaverse world. Truly exciting. And I think it's a game changer as we move forward for Web3. Before I came to Unstoppable, I was with one of those companies, Tom. I was with Amazon Web Services for about 5 years. And that's actually where I started on my Web3 journey, looking after blockchain and seeing how our customers were using blockchain and having things on chain and off chain. It was just fascinating. And then started with a couple of side projects that I was working on and just became fascinated with the power of Web3 and the metaverse and how the next generation of the internet was going to change things throughout the world. I will tell you, Max, one of the things that surprised me the most when I came over, because I came over from Amazon, in the Web2 world, where women were about 25%, still not enough, but about 25% entered the Web3 world and found that, it was single digits. And so I also founded a group called Unstoppable Women of Web3. We now have 78 companies, including Google, Deloitte from the Web2 world, and then also the who's who of Web3 that belong to that group, like blockchain.com, Binance, OpenSea, and of course, Unstoppable, as well as many more. And our mission is to educate everyone on Web3 so that we'll have an equal world. Our mission and comment is Web3 for all. So that's really what I'm interested in, is having this gateway. And why I'm so excited about this panel is making, that gateway to Web3. So Web3 is available for everyone.
Yeah, thank you for what you do. And definitely, if you remember what was written in the Plato State, he actually mentioned that the education is the key to rule. So I still, after 2000 years, those line I still remains the power. Yes, of course. Thank you so much. And Lane, let's go and see, and let's hear you.
Okay, great.
Hi, Max. Good to see you. Thanks for having me, and hi to all my fellow panelists. Nice to meet you. I'm Lane Kasselman. I'm the Chief Business Officer at blockchain.com. And we are one of the biggest and oldest Web3 companies in the world. We've got over 85 million retail customers across 200 countries. We have thousands of institutional clients across that customer base. And for nearly 10 years, we've been on the front lines of, what was called digital assets and digital currency, and then crypto, and now Web3 over that decade. And I think what's so exciting about being in this space now, more than just having so many amazing people shift from classical traditional finance or traditional tech and moving into the space because they see the power of the ecosystem. But you get to have some really amazing partners. And Unstoppable Domains is actually one of our partners. And so it's really good to see Sandy. And there's really some amazing coalescence happening between various leaders in the space. And I'm excited to talk about it with you all today.
Yes, thank you so much. Indeed, if we remove the connotation, like those ideological connotation from the word ideology, I would say those blockchain in the widest understanding community is kind of those ideas who are driven by those ideology of a better future. And that's why it's so exciting to be among those people and to work with them on a daily basis. So we, as I guess everyone here, encourage everyone to join blockchain community and this decentralization path. But we already started to mention the term Web3. Before we go further into the discussion, I'd like to give a word to Sandy, who will make a presentation about Web3. Sandy, it's your word.
Okay, great. Thanks, Max. And great to have all these amazing panelists here. So what I was asked to do is just to intro a little bit about what Web3 is before we start talking about it. There are lots of definitions, but I love this one sentence that really frames it up. So Web3 is an open movement, so it's not closed, as Tom talked about, making sure that we don't have closed movements, to broadly decentralize the internet, to make sure that it is distributed. And the key, I believe, is allowing for individual ownership of both identity as well as personal data. So when I get asked, like, what's the one difference, if you could just put it in one word, the difference between Web 2 and Web 3, that one word for me would be ownership. In the Web 2 world, the ownership of data and even your identity is owned by very large companies and in some cases governments. And the profit and the financial benefits come from they're selling your data. In the Web 3 world, though, the data is owned by you, the person, and the member. Like in Web 2, you're a user. In Web 3, you are a member of the community. So if you have to explain to someone in one word, like I do a lot of times to people who just say, just give me the elevator pitch, the difference between Web 2 and Web 3 is ownership. And then we drew this picture to try to frame up all the buzzwords that are coming at us today to see how they all fit together. And so what I'd like to do first is to start with the two sides of this two-sided marketplace. On the left, you have that creator economy that you heard from Radhika about NFTs, right? That creation that's happening today. On the right-hand side, you see the second part of that two-sided marketplace, which are a lot of these digital networks that are providing that consumption that's coming in. So the two-sided marketplace, I think, is really an important element of what we're seeing shape today. At the bottom of the piece in the center, I think this really helps me. I'm a visual learner. And so for me to see visuals is really important. So at the bottom, which everything is based on, is the blockchain. And the blockchain is simply a way to store data, much like you would have with a storage shed that you would store your goods in. But even more importantly, blockchain provides that trusted and secure exchange that you do today. I believe it is the backbone of everything that's happening in the marketplace today. And then Web3 comes on top. It's built on the blockchain and it provides that decentralized access and that self-sovereignty in terms of identity and data. Just like in that definition of Web3, really focusing in on the ownership of data and being decentralized. Now, today I have DAOs kind of in the center of the stack. I think that DAOs are actually becoming so important. I could have had the whole chart circle around DAOs. And a DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization, and it enables for governance. In fact, many companies today are governed through DAOs versus through shareholders. For example, one of our partners, Decentraland, is actually structured as a DAO. In a lot of cases, DAOs are managed by artificial intelligence. And then the next layer are metaverses. So no, metaverse and Web3 isn't fighting against each other. I believe a metaverse is based on Web3 and the blockchain. And the metaverse really has those digital experiences where you create an avatar for yourself, but you live and you work and you breathe inside of the metaverse. It's a new world created on top of technologies we know and love like AR and VR. And then at the very top are the interfaces. And this is where if you're a startup, I think you could really take advantage of some of the gaps that we have today in the interfaces, the way that you go after accessing a metaverse or a Web3 or a blockchain. In fact, I just did a conference in the metaverse, and two participants couldn't figure out how to get off of the ceiling of the conference room, which was quite funny. It wasn't their problem, it was the problem of the interface itself. So I hope this helps you to visualize, like I said, I'm a visual learner, the two-sided marketplace and how all of these buzzwords that Max talks about at the beginning all fit together. Max, back over to you.
Thank you, Sandy. That was enlightening. Thank you so much. And since you started it already, I'd like to ask all our panelists, just follow the Sandy's example and give me one word which actually associated, like you can associate with Web3 movement, and dive a little bit in that your own definition of Web3. So let's start with you, Lane. So what would be your word?
Well, I think so. Let's see, Web1, I'll say GeoCities. Web2, I'll say Facebook, and Web3, I'll say blockchain.com. You want me to explain? You want me to extrapolate on each of them?
I guess it's clear, but tell your own definition of Web3. What is
Sure.
Web3?
So, Web 1, the reason I said GeoCity is, I don't know if I'm dating myself on this forum, but that was static content, right? So that was hosted on a server somewhere. Likely it wasn't owned by a major enterprise, and it was a one-way source of information, right? There was no interaction between parties. You were just getting static information off a website. Web 2, of course, is where we're transitioning from, and that is the era of major tech companies owning our data and serving as an intermediary between our activities on the web, whether that's a financial transaction or just a social transaction or anything else. It could be one of the FANG companies or a major multinational financial corporation, but they sit in the middle. They own your data. Web 3 is the elimination of the middleman, right? So it's shifting that dynamic from corporations to individuals. So, it went from static one-way content to needing an intermediary to process information to now it's one-to-one between two parties. And whether one party is a corporation, an individual, whatever, doesn't matter. But that's really where we are today. And what's so exciting about it, because what's the problem with intermediaries, right? They're expensive, they take a lot of time, and they exert their own control for their own benefit. So if you eliminate them, you're eliminating those vulnerabilities and that delay and that challenge in the process.
Yeah, thank you so much. Radhika, what would be your word for Web3? Oh, I guess you're muted.
If it had to be just one word, I'd say it's maybe transformative is the word that I would pick for Web3. But the definition of Web3 is as we've been talking about now since the beginning of the panel, it's about peer-to-peer interactions. It's about shared data. It's about decentralization. And I think that, Web3 has come about in this particular time because we've really crossed the boundaries of Web 2 and what it can provide. Web 2, I think we will talk about this later in the panel, I believe, but if you look at what Web 2 couldn't do is what Web 3 can do. And so it's providing that secure layer, it's providing the trust layer, it's providing a value layer, it's also providing an identity layer. So, I think all of these things we're going to be continuing to talk about, but I think it's providing the things that Web 2 cannot provide, because Web 2 has been based on TCP/IP as a protocol, which, as we all remember, is a communications protocol. So it really wasn't designed to do anything else but for open communication. And even with open communication, there's issues with that. So I think that where we're really breaching the boundaries or have breached the boundaries of Web 2 is where Web 3 comes in, and it really is going to reshape everything we know about this online digital world, which is now, we're getting into things like the metaverse, for example, and the experience into a 3D virtual experience. There are so many aspects on trust and value and privacy and security and identity that are going to be absolutely mission critical. Otherwise, we're going to be perpetuating the same problems that exist in Web 2.0 world.
Yeah, exactly. And so just to highlight one more time, your word was transformative or transformation, right?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Tom, your word.
I think I'd say peer-to-peer. So we'll hyphenate it so I get away with that. And I'll say peer-to-peer because for a couple of reasons. But one, the way kind of architecture has evolved from kind of company and kind of applications is first everyone hosted things internally. Then they were dragged kicking and screaming to the cloud, starting in the late 90s, going to 2000s. And everybody thought they wanted to have their own servers in-house because it was cheaper and more reliable. They could control it. Then they realized actually the cloud's cheaper, the cloud's more reliable, et cetera. And so everyone started moving there. And I think peer-to-peer is the next and probably final, iteration of architecture where people realize that having redundant and frankly, open source platforms to both host and build their applications is probably the superior alternative to the cloud. And so it's going to take a while, but I think peer-to-peer is the future. And then once you're peer-to-peer though, importantly, and this is a slight difference with some of the panelists, a little bit, is peer-to-peer doesn't necessarily mean blockchain. And so if we think about the very first peer-to-peer company at scale, it's Napster, right? And that had nothing to do with, way predated Bitcoin and crypto and everything. And so peer-to-peer, I think, is the future. And I think crypto and blockchain, which are not the same, but pretty closely linked, play a critical role in making that peer-to-peer world happen. But I think you'll have some of the largest and most successful applications not actually be blockchain based. And I think we're even today, like of the storage layer with both IPFS and Arweave, which are decentralized peer-to-peer storage networks storing exabytes of data. It's actually not stored on the blockchain, but the blockchain is used to validate, track, and provide payments and incentives for that storage. And so I also think that carries over to compute, which right now in the blockchain world can be done in a peer-to-peer manner via smart contracts, but those are slow and expensive. And so I think you also will have a peer-to-peer compute layer like the one Fluence has built, but there could be others that will allow kind of a wider variety of compute far faster and more and far cheaper than what is blockchain based, and also more resilient and less and more censorship resistant than centralized compute, which we have now. So I think that it's really peer-to-peer is sort of the Web3 world that we're talking about, and that has kind of and peer-to-peer is a big universe, big family. It can incorporate a great deal, but that's where we're headed.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. But Radhika, since you mentioned the transformation as the main word for you within the Web3, let me ask you that question. But is there anything wrong about the current web? Why, in the first place, do we need that paradigm shift to the way internet works now?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, there is a really very compelling set of reasons why we're in the middle of this transformation, and it's going to be something that's going to be decades of change, if you will, and I say decades of change. The change is already happening, but what we're going to reap the benefits of is decades long in coming. So I think that, if you look at what's wrong with Web3, we talked about some of the points already through all of the panelists, but it's the lack of a trust layer, right? And so there's no way to establish online trust. I remember early on in the day when there was a cartoon that showed, it could be a dog behind a screen, and that was sort of the internet. You don't really know who's behind it, right? And so it was kind of a funny joke and a funny meme at the time, but I think it conveyed the concept that you don't really know who's on the other side, right? And so this establishment of trust is incredibly important, particularly when you're dealing with online transactions and online interaction. The lack of value in the Web3, in the Web2 world, which is to say that you need intermediaries to create that value. And so when you move into a peer-to-peer system, as what Tom was talking about, that's really what creates that internet of value. And then finally, the internet of identity is also lacking. So there's lack of identity, which means you don't really know how to authenticate somebody and validate somebody. And in the Web2 world, you might have multiple identifiers for the same person, right? So every time you log into any one of these companies that's providing a way to establish your identity, that's a unique identifier. So there's multiple identifiers for each person or each entity. And so when you're thinking about all of these that add up, the internet and the Web2 world was really not private or secure by design. It was just an open communication based on an open communication protocol, which was TCP/IP. So Web3 is really changing and transforming all of that because it is private and secure by design. And it is going to be based on principles of peer-to-peer interactions, shared data, and decentralization, because having one entity and owner of that data, as Sandy was talking about, is really going to be detrimental because it creates a information asymmetry and a power asymmetry So the Web3 world is really changing all of that and providing equal access and democratization and equal access to power and information.
Yes, thank you so much. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. When we talk about the what's wrong about the current web, like on the first place, we wouldn't be here today and discussing this topic if everything was good about that internet, right? So that's why we should have that conversation. And the more people have that conversation daily, the better it is, the more the level of adoption rises, right? So I forgot to mention that if you want to join our conversation, don't forget to go on your social media using the hashtag Webit. You can ask your question there, you can leave your comments and maybe your definitions and maybe your perspective of what's wrong with the current web, right? So, and speaking about the Web 2, of course, like it's already 2 decades of the current web right now. And keeping in mind what just Radhika said about what we should change about that internet. So, Sandy, let me ask you that question. Which mistakes we must avoid to build a better web, in your opinion?
Well, I think one, which is the big one that I think everybody's talked about, is about who owns the data and where the data is stored and placed. And so for me, that's probably one of the biggest things that I think in Web3 that we need to look after is where is the data ownership? Where is the identity ownership? So, you know, today, if you think about it, you use one ID and one password to sign into Google, another to sign into Instagram, another to sign into Twitter. And, you know, when you kick up a new platform like Discord, I don't take any of that value or any of that influence with me because that data and that identity is not owned by me. It's actually owned by each of those applications. And so I believe that one of the biggest things that Web3 has to get right is digital identity and data ownership. And for me, that means that you're able to use one ID and password. Like today, I don't know about you guys, I just counted, I have 289 usernames and passwords, 289. So imagine a world where you have one identity and you can log into a DeFi application. You can log into the metaverse. You could log into a game. You could use that for your crypto wallet. You could use that everywhere. And for me, I think that that's really powerful because then that means that I, not a company, can decide who I share information with. We're working with one retailer today, and they were telling me that when they do a promotion, the first thing they do is they buy data, let's say from Facebook. So they have to pay Facebook for it. And then they know that they're going to get 20 to 40% fraud because people will use different email accounts to get that same coupon. In the Web3 world, they're looking forward to it because then they can validate that I am a person, one person. They can offer me a reward for my data, and therefore they can reward me for the data that I own and the data that I choose to share. And I see this being such a powerful concept. In fact, when people ask me my favorite Web3 application today that will use digital identity, it hasn't been created. But for example, we're working with Arizona State University today to store data about you for your diploma, your certifications. My daughter just took a class at a community college. And in order to get the transcript, I actually had to fax. First, I had to find a fax machine, by the way. I had to fax information to the college, to the community college. It took me 4 months to get that transcript. We also envision, we're working with several people today on healthcare data. With my new company, I just recently moved and I'm trying to get my data, and many medical facilities won't give it to me, even though it's data about me. They'll only give it to another medical profession. So I imagine a world where your digital identity travels with you. It provides you access. It's data that I decide to share, that you decide to share when you want to share it. And it's an identity that can unlock, the value prop of Web3 throughout. Yeah,
thank you so much. That is indeed, I guess we all have our personal experiences about something similar when you're trying to get and they're asking you to send the facts, which is literally where should I get that one?
Yeah, who has a fax anymore?
Yeah, but they still do, which is
Yeah.
definitely, and we're talking about Web3. Still, we
Yeah.
keep talking about that, and it kind of related to the topic about the data ownership. But Tom, I'd like to ask you, but you mentioned since your word was peer-to-peer, I would definitely ask you, but definitely Web3 is trying to give people the power back to users, right? So, but on the first place, why do we need that? Like, why not just to give that power to those centralized organizations?
Well, you certainly can if you like, Venezuela or China as a model to aspire to. And so if you don't want that, then I think owning your own data and having ability to be to be either anonymous or to communicate freely are kind of critical, kind of foundational kind of elements to building a kind of functioning society and ecosystem. And so I think that what peer-to-peer does is it helps both businesses and people have more resilient ecosystems and censorship resistant ones. And so each of those are important. And so a couple examples, in India, the government at one point banned a whole number of social media or WhatsApp accounts of the opposition political party. They also shut down, I think it might have been WhatsApp or else Facebook groups that were about organizing a farmers strike, protesting a particular legislation targeting kind of wheat pricing or centralization of grain kind of distribution. And so and Twitter and Facebook employees were threatened with jail if they didn't comply. And so we think of it, and you obviously see stuff in the US from censorship of COVID related stuff that turned out to be true from Twitter, or you name a whole bunch of things. But the point is, I guess, that these are just sort of the initial steps. And don't forget, we're not talking about Russia here or China, but India's a democracy and that stuff is happening. So that is, and it's easy to do, right? Because everyone is on WhatsApp and Facebook and something else. So it's very easy to threaten shareholders, threaten employees, and threaten management, right? Those are three very simple ways to go out and to have massive control and impact with very clear steps that a government can take. In a decentralized, say, messaging protocol, for example, there's no shareholders, there's no management. It's run and operated by communities of people that may even be anonymous, maybe all over. There's not one server to shut down. The infrastructure is also duplicated. So it is a far more censorship resistant setup that prevents that type of kind of impact from happening. It also is more resilient. You shut down some servers, the actual code is replicated in multiple places, in multiple geographies and multiple jurisdictions, so it can keep running. This, by the way, leads to other problems, right? It means that it's harder to take stuff off or stuff could be on it that is actually bad and negative and dangerous. So it's by no means a zero-sum game for good, and so requires a variety of self-policing potentially. But that is what I think we're trying to build, is both businesses that don't run the risk of getting shut down, and people that don't run the risk of jail for not kind of enforcing sort of suspect directives from politicians.
Yeah, sure. Radhika?
Yeah, I just had a quick comment to make. And, Tom, you bring up some really great points in terms of the tricky balance that has to be achieved. Even in democratic systems, there is a very tricky balance that has to be achieved, which is even more difficult to achieve than in a centralized, autocratic sort of system. And that balance is that trilemma that I often talk about, which is, there is a tug between three different forces. So on the one hand, in a system, like a government system, the government is interested in two things, is interested in compliance and is interested in security. And in an open government, open democratic sort of system, ideally, you want to have preservation of privacy too. So I think this trilemma between security, compliance, and privacy is going to be very, very critical. So even as we go forward in decentralized systems, anonymity itself is going to be also tricky, truly tricky, because for certain reasons, we're going to have authentication of that individual or that entity for it to be something that is compliant. And so you just can't have a truly anonymous kind of system because of that. So I think, as we go forward, I've worked with, for example, the whole concept of central bank digital currencies, for example, and this is the very core trilemma that they're trying to solve at governmental systems, is saying, how do we achieve that balance? If we're going to be this democratic society and we're going to have a government that supports the rights of citizens within its country, how do we achieve the balance between compliance, security, and privacy, more than important than anything else, and preservation of our individual rights as much as anything else? But I think that you brought up some really great points, and I wanted to throw that out.
Listen, those are, I agree. Those are difficult. I'd be a little bit more negative on the government side than I think your implication is potentially. But and because I think that one government primary objective is to stay in power, and I think that's actually the number one objective. And so whether that's a party or whether that's an individual or a system, has historically been a real focus, and so that leads to bleeding in of and de-emphasis of privacy. There are systems right now where you can have completely anonymous messaging. It does exist. It's just slow and cumbersome and not widely used, I think. And metadata is still tracked, which basically makes them kind of harder to be fully anonymous. But I think you will see that happen in the future. That's whether those are used and how much so, I'm not entirely sure. But I hear your point on the CBDC comment that if you basically want to engage in a society, you'll probably have to be authenticated in order to use the currency, and that is going to lead to a lot of risks. Let's just say.
There's risks with everything. I think we could probably have a whole panel just talking about that.
But just to be clear, what people forget. But people forget.
We should definitely take that. I'm involved in so many different discussions on that level with, at that level. So we probably could go on just on that point alone. It's going to be an interesting thing. There's truly anonymous systems, I think, are going to be tricky, because even with a blockchain, it's the proof of work kind of systems, it's pseudonymous. It's not quite anonymous, right? And so that true anonymity is sort of that ultimate limit, but there are constraints in terms of how you achieve that balance within governmental systems, which are also important. Otherwise, you've got, a society that doesn't have, law and order, essentially. So there's a purpose for government, but it's finding the right balance, I think, and that's what we're in agreement with.
Totally, and I guess I just say that cash is anonymous. And every step away from cash gets us less anonymous. And we're clearly headed that way, right? I'm not saying we're not, but we forget that cash is anonymous. And that is what all systems have started.
And that also has foibles, i.e. money laundering, which has been conducted via cash because it is precisely anonymous.
Of course,
so anyway,
of course.
Whole other conversation there.
Definitely.
We should have that conversation separately on a separate panel for sure. Definitely, it's like a tip for organizers to invite us for a second conversation on finding that balance. But since we already started to talk about that, Lane, I'd like you to ask me that question. Definitely, the movement and what is happening right now with the Web3 is definitely kind of a revolution. But would that be, or evolution, whatever you prefer to describe that, right? But would that be those changes be only on a technological level, or there will be some drastic social changes as well behind that changes?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, Max, because it's already happening. I think it's very easy on panels like this and certainly other discussions about Web3 and crypto to be very absolute in the analysis and sort of the view of what's going to happen. But the reality is, and our company sees this firsthand every day because we operate in so many different markets, is that the application of Web3 technology varies dramatically across countries and markets. There is a big difference between how North America and Latin America engage in crypto, which makes sense, right? Just naturally. But really, what does that mean? Well, in Latin America, crypto has replaced the need for, just as we were talking about, the use of cash or the reliance on, what is maybe a unreliable or untrustworthy banking system. And so we're seeing a cultural shift. And this is actually, true in multiple parts of Africa, certainly in Nigeria, where normal people, right? Like people who are not necessarily early adopters in tech and certainly not in crypto have shifted to using digital assets for not some greater purpose, right? They're not trying to find necessarily a safe store of value. They're just looking for on-ramps to Netflix and Spotify and sort of the normal services that everybody else uses. But they don't really have a solid or sufficient banking system that can be used to give them that on-ramp. That's very different than what we're seeing happen in North America, where our financial system is great, right? Like everything works. My credit card always works. I'm not worried about it. And crypto offers a different use case for consumers here. And so I think when you're looking at, all right, what is the actual use case? How are things going to change? We are seeing real examples of it, but we shouldn't expect those examples to be representative of the entire planet because we are very different communities and very different markets. And we will sort of find our unique piece of crypto, just like saying finance, right? That means a million different things. That's the same thing with Web3 or crypto or whatever term you want to use. It means so many different things. And just depending on what market you're in, where you live in the world and what your needs are, that will truly define the types of Web3 tools and services you want. The reality is like, you're probably not going to care much about the metaverse right now if you live in Colombia, right? Like it's just not a priority to you. Whereas people in North America can experiment with it and we can do meetings in the metaverse, right? It's just a different market, different experience.
Yes, for sure. Sandy, and what is your view on the social changes that will be brought by the Web3?
Yeah, I love Lane's comments about the differences with Africa, Latin America, and North America. The other change that I experienced just culturally coming in from Web 2, from Amazon to Web 3, is this whole culture of a community as well. And I'm sure that Lane has experienced similar things. When you come into Web 3, it's we're all going to make it, right? It's not we're going to battle and we're going to fight it out, even though that does exist. But the whole cultural moment is different, even creating roadmaps. So when I was at AWS, we would create a roadmap. We'd get some input, but we would create it and then we would unveil it. In Web3, there is so much community involvement and engagement that the roadmap is actually designed and created by the community. And it's a difference in the societal ways that you think about projects and you think about community. Even the concept of, I am a member, I'm not a user, has a whole different cultural mindset as well that I think is already, swept in. And, one of my favorite quotes is that culture eats strategy for lunch or for dinner or whatever you want to say. I think all of these cultural elements around the user has power, the user owns data, the community gets to help design the roadmap, the community gets a vote. We're all going to make it. We're working for the good. All boats rise. I think is a very different mindset than the Web 2 world that exists today.
Yeah, for sure. And just like to mention that it's from a linguistic perspective, there is like a term for children who are acquiring their first language is how to use iPod. So we call them in linguistic iPod native speakers. So definitely what I'm trying to say with that metaphor, indeed, there are some challenges on a way to get that real mass adoption of that Web3 and the technology behind that. But for sure, in time, it will come inevitably. And for us who already been lived that life when iPod appeared, and we actually had to try to adjust ourselves to that new reality, how to use those touch screens, etc. There are already like a generation of people who were born with that knowledge. The same would happen with Web3. So we're building something for the better future. And I think that's important. And education, again, let's say it again, education is the key to unlock that future. So I'm very grateful for you for that amazing discussion today and a great panel. It was a pure pleasure to be here today with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks so much. Thanks for Webit for all you do as well. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Max. Great moderator. Thank you, sir.